British-made Storm Shadow missiles fired into Russia by Ukraine for the first time. How will Putin respond? Good evening. A day after firing American missiles into Russia, Ukraine has used British ones too. The target was in the Kursk region next to Ukraine and came as Ukrainians and foreign embassies in Kyiv were braced for large-scale Russian airstrikes in response. That hasn't happened yet, and the Ukrainian government has said the threats spreading on social media are all part of Russia's psychological warfare. The British government hasn't commented on or even confirmed the use of Storm Shadow, despite the fact it specifically crosses the new red line in Russia's nuclear doctrine, announced yesterday. So is Britain's action based on thinking Putin is bluffing? Should MPs at least have got a say in it?
And good evening from Lambeth Palace, where the Archbishop of Canterbury has announced he'll move out with the Christmas tree on January the 6th. Tonight, the author of the bombshell report into the John Smythe Church abuse scandal speaks for the first time, telling us Justin Welby's resignation should be just the start of a fundamental overhaul, urging the Church to consider calling in the police and that further resignations should be expected. If this was any other organisation or institution, if someone had combined to cover up abuse of this nature, they would resign, wouldn't they?
I think there'd be an expectation of resignation, yes.
Also tonight,
this is going to hurt me a lot worse than it hurts you.
Get her!
President Trump continues to name his cabinet, with, seen here with her daughter, the former head of the World Wrestling Entertainment, as Secretary for Education. And we visit the Rothbury estate, the biggest land sale in England for 30 years. The charity buying it says they'll create a flagship of nature recovery.
We are using all the means to defend our country, Ukraine's defence minister said today, as he declined to comment on reports that Ukraine has used the British-made Storm Shadow to target sites inside Russia for the first time. Although Number 10 also said they will not comment, it is thought permission to use longer-range missiles was given by the UK and the US following the deployment of more than 10,000 North Korean troops on Russia's border with Ukraine. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent, Porrick O'Brien, reports.
The target may have been a surprise. The type of missile used was not. Weeks of speculation that the British would allow the Storm Shadow to be used by Ukraine inside Russia came to an end today. Russian military bloggers circulated this video saying it was the Franco-British long-range cruise missile being used in Kursk. We can't verify that. If this was the Storm Shadow, though, what is striking, the number of these bunker-busting aircraft-launched missiles used. They're over £1 million a pop. This would suggest that this was a very high-value target. The Storm Shadow has a range of about 150 miles. It's made in Britain and France, but the targeting and location data programmed into the missile is owned by the US, so today's strike is highly unlikely to have happened without a green light from Washington.
If you were Ukraine and the UK and others, you wouldn't want to talk exactly about how this has all been configured and what information is provided when. But fundamentally, it's likely that to get the best possible targeting information, at some point the US would have to agree to release information.
Yesterday, the American ATACMS system was used for the first time by Ukraine to hit targets in Russia proper, after Joe Biden finally gave permission, hesitating for months over fear of escalation and worries about whether its use in Russia would meaningfully shift the dial or not. Once that happened, just a matter of time before the British equivalent was deployed in this way as well. This week has all been about missiles, which is important, but the biggest problem the Ukrainian military have is something else.
It's that they have a mobilization and recruitment and training problem. They simply don't have enough people going through the system and on the line at the moment. The numbers game of people is critical to Ukraine's long-term viability.
It was this issue that Ukrainian soldiers wanted to talk to us about last month near the eastern front line in Donbass. Just a month on, this area is now under Russian control. As we left in October, new Ukrainian fortifications as far as the eye could see, bracing for the possibility of the front line buckling.
Warwick O'Brien reporting, well, even as reports of the Storm Shadow strikes were emerging, the Defence Secretary was in the House of Commons announcing cuts to naval ships, drones and helicopters. Our senior political correspondent, Paul McNamara, joins us from Westminster. Paul.
Yeah, usually when a government starts a speech to Parliament with a warning of, quote, increased global threats, you expect a big announcement of more funding, not £500 million worth of cuts. Ships, drones and helicopters all being scrapped. Now, quite a few sources today saying actually the Defence Secretary had a reasonable argument for each of those. For instance, HMS Bulwark and HMS Albion are two ships being scrapped. They haven't been used at sea for years, they're costing millions, and they were due to be scrapped anyway, so that's been sped up. But it means the UK will have no amphibious assault ships. 17 Puma helicopters, the oldest 52 years old, 14 CH-47 Chinooks, some 37 years old, they're going. You can understand the argument for getting rid of outdated kit when finances are looking tight. But if there's one lesson that's been shown time again from the war in Ukraine, it's that when push comes to shove, often old kit is better than no kit.
Well, speaking of Ukraine, might they be getting some of this?
No decisions have been made yet on that. The government simply don't know what they're going to be doing with the kit that's going. But the surprising thing, talking to senior and retired military sources, not the anger and outrage you would usually expect, but almost sighs of resignation. A few of them, though, pointed out two things. Firstly, the Defence Secretary recommitted that 2.5% of GDP being spent on defence, but no timeline. And secondly, a few of them pointing out this one line buried at the bottom of his speech, quote, "These will not be the last difficult decisions I will have to make to fix the defence inheritance that we were left." The military's biggest fear for forces they say which have already been hollowed out, yet more cuts ahead.
Paul McNamara. Well, the Labour MP, Tandesi, chairs the Defence Select Committee and joins me now from Westminster. Do you think MPs should have got more of a say in whether Storm Shadow should be used by Ukraine, given it now clearly crosses the red line drawn by Russia on its use of nuclear weapons?
Well, Christian, I think we would all acknowledge that we live in an increasingly volatile and dangerous world, and that is an issue that has become more and more to the fore, whether it's in terms of Russia's illegal invasion within our continent. We've got now the increased the escalation of deployment of North Korean troops on European soil. We've got increased conflict, whether it's in the Middle East, across the Sahel, other parts of Africa and Asia, and of course we've got the issues and the tensions around the Indo-Pacific. So within that wider context, if we are to provide support to Ukraine, as I've said on the floor of the House since last month, many of us have been saying that we should be obviously giving strong, solid support to Ukraine, our friends and allies, but at the same time, they should not be out there defending themselves with one hand tied behind their backs.
Yeah, but this is a very specific thing.
Not just give them the equipment.
I mean, Storm Shadow the use of Storm Shadow is seen by Russia as specifically breaking its new nuclear doctrine, which is the assistance of a non-nuclear power by a nuclear power, and they say they will then view that as a joint attack, which potentially makes British targets, the focus of Russian interest. Now, the British government seems to be just operating on the basis that that's a bluff. It won't happen. And MPs haven't really had an opportunity to discuss that.
Look, Christian, we've had a lot of unuseful rhetoric and diatribe from Russia before. Even when we provided support to Ukraine initially, we had an increase in the sound bites coming out from Putin. We've had that constantly, even when we provided them with more military equipment or with aid. So I think over the last 3 years, if that's something that we have seen constantly, is that's what we are going to be getting from Putin. What we need to do is to supply the military and other aid to Ukraine, and we must advise them that, look, this equipment obviously has to be used within the confines of international humanitarian law.
Now, the opposition and right-wing press, it should be said, are attacking the government over these cuts. Now, they come with the backing of the service chiefs, but it's not a good look, is it, when you might be entering a new phase of a war with Russia when Britain's getting rid of £500 million worth of weapons?
Look, as I said on the floor of the House when I was questioning the Secretary of State after he'd made his statement, that overall I welcome these changes, these reforms, because many of these reforms to the operations of the MOD, the military, Ministry of Defence, they are long overdue. It is important that we get rid of older platforms and transition to newer equipment. But at the same time, what we must ensure is that our people are supported, so that how are they reskilled and retrained to use that newer equipment. And at the same time, what I asked him is that some of this equipment, is that going to be sold to either allies or is that going to be given to Ukraine? We need that investment in newer technology, those newer pieces of equipment, rather than relying on things which, as your reporter mentioned earlier, have sometimes not been out for years. So being docked on the shores of the UK is not as much use to us as if we are investing in newer bits of kit. So I think it's important that that's what we do.
Tandesi, thank you very much indeed. Kathy.
Thanks, Krish, and welcome to Lambeth Palace, where today the Archbishop of Canterbury has announced he'll step aside from his official duties by January the 6th, the day of Epiphany. He resigned in the wake of a report into serial abuse by Christian summer camp leader John Smythe, who was first unmasked by this programme. The Makin review was ordered as a result, and its author, Keith Makin, went on to conclude that Smythe was the most prolific abuser to be associated with the Church of England.
We're told that you beat young men until they bled. Why did you do that?
In 2017, Channel 4 News brought John Smythe's abuse to world attention.
I'm not talking about this.
Triggering an independent review into the Church of England's handling of allegations of his abuse from the 1970s to Smythe's death in 2018.
Well, we've spoken to these victims who say that you beat them so hard that they bled.
Former Social Services Director Keith Makin was the man charged with carrying out that review, and it was devastating. It found as many as 130 men and boys were abused by Smythe across 3 countries over 4 decades, and that multiple opportunities to stop him were missed.
With the knowledge I have now, I know that senior leaders in the Church of England knew about his abuse, and somehow they saw fit to allow him to relocate to Zimbabwe.
In 1982, a secret report into Smythe was drawn up by a Cambridge vicar called Mark Ruston. But, Makin notes, the recipients of that report participated in an active cover-up. In 1984, Smythe moved to Zimbabwe, where he was able to set up summer camps and continue his abuse. In 1992, a 16-year-old boy called Guy Nachuru died at one of those camps. Smythe was charged with culpable homicide, but the case fell apart. In 2001, Smythe moved on again, this time to South Africa, where he lived until his death. But another opportunity to stop him was missed in 2013, when allegations of abuse were reported to Stephen Conway, then the Bishop of Ely. Conway wrote to the Anglican Church in South Africa, raising concerns about the risk Smythe posed to children and adults. The Archbishop of Canterbury and his then chaplain Joe Bailey-Wells were also made aware of the allegations, but there was no formal referral to police. The Macon Review said Bishop Conway was in a potentially powerful position to explore this further, to reinforce the referral to South Africa, to ensure that a police referral had been made. But he showed complacency in his handling of the issue. Bishop Conway says he did all within his authority as a bishop of the Church of England, but acknowledges that he did not pursue it as rigorously as he should. Jo Bailey-Wells says she regrets not doing more to verify the assurances given to her or query assumptions. Both say they believed the matter had been reported to the UK police.
Morning, everyone.
Justin Welby said today he was leaving on January the 6th. But this week there were separate allegations that the Archbishop of York, Stephen Cottrell, had also presided over a cover-up involving allegations from a former vicar abused as a teenager by a priest. The Archbishop of York denies the allegations, but survivors continue to press for a clean sweep at the top of the Church of England. Well, earlier I sat down with Keith Macon for his first interview since his report was published. I began by asking him what he thought about the impact of his report.
I have to say I'm very pleased with the impact it's having. There's two things I wanted the report to achieve, and one is to get the victims' message across firmly. I've threaded through the report the victims' experiences, and that has come across very strongly, I think. And also to have an impact and to help to bring about change within the church procedures. And I think most of those things have been achieved.
Well, amongst the impacts, of course, was the resignation of Justin Welby. Was it the right decision for him to resign, do you think?
I think from the victims' point of view, it's the feedback I've had, I'm in touch with a number of victims, is that they thought it was the right outcome, really.
If you look at the criticism in your report, you know, former archbishop, multiple bishops, senior clergy, some of them criticised much more severely than Justin Welby, and yet I don't see anything happening to any of them. Does that suggest that the church is still in some denial in its response?
I think one of the issues is the church, and to use a colloquialism, the church is marking its own homework. I think church officials have been aware of the issues that I've been raising. I did report in several people during the course of the review happening. They were aware of issues, they've looked at those issues, but they have not been effective, in my opinion, in bringing about change.
Let me pick up on one of the bishops who you raised serious concerns about, and that's the former Bishop of Ely, now Lincoln, Stephen Conway. You said he was in, and I quote, a potentially powerful position to explore concerns about Smythe further, to reinforce the referral to South Africa, to ensure that a police referral had been made, but he showed, in your words again, complacency in his handling of the issue. No formal referral to the police was made. Expand on that. How big a failing has there been in that case?
The problem was that a process didn't start into exploring whether John Smythe still posed a threat in South Africa.
Well, quantify that. How big a failing is that on the part of someone who's a senior leader in the church?
I would say in terms of not bringing John Smythe to justice much earlier than the start of the police investigation, much earlier than actually happened, which is far too late. In those terms, yes, that's a serious failing.
A serious failing. And if there had been a kind of consistent approach taken, if what the Archbishop of Canterbury did or didn't do was sufficient to merit his resignation, what the Bishop of Lincoln, previously Ely, did or didn't do should have prompted the same resignation, shouldn't it?
I think it could be argued there's a logic to that, yes.
And
but I've got to stress, it's not. My report didn't.
You don't make
recommendations
about.
that,
No, absolutely. No. A lot of people have said to me, well, based on what your report unearthed and the devastating nature of what you found, that the police should be called in over anyone who helped cover this scandal up. Is that appropriate in your view? Are there grounds for that, or does the law at the time not allow for that?
I think we're looking at a big span of time, I do think that there needs to be consideration given as to whether police action needs to be taken. I actually don't know the answer to that.
But you'd like that to be considered?
I think it must be considered, yes.
There's also allegations in recent days from a former vicar abused as a teenager by a priest that the Archbishop of York, who's the number 2 in the church obviously, Stephen Cottrell, also presided over a cover-up. And, you know, the Archbishop denies the allegations, but survivors say this is part and parcel of what is needed, a huge sort of overhaul of church culture. Do you agree on that point, that, you know, the Archbishop of Canterbury's resignation is just the start of this kind of clear out?
I think the church does need to look very carefully at absolutely everything within its remit. I'm not in a position really to comment on any individuals within that, but if these same kinds of conditions apply to any other senior official, you know, bishop or whatever within the church, then yes, the same should unfold.
So anyone in the church, however senior or junior, who's been involved in a cover-up needs to get out, basically?
I think it needs to be taken very seriously and to be examined. The appropriate action taken, and in some cases, yes, that may include them having to step down, yes.
If this was any other organisation or institution, if someone had combined to cover up abuse of this nature, they would resign, wouldn't they?
I think there'd be an expectation of resignation, yes.
Keith Macon, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Well, joining me now from Newcastle Cathedral is the Right Reverend Helen Ann Hartley, Bishop of Newcastle, who called on Justin Welby to resign after the publication of the Macon report. Bishop Helen Ann, you started the ball rolling, really, were pretty pivotal in Justin Welby's decision to resign. Plenty of his allies say actually he could have stuck it out. What do you say to them?
I think the Archbishop was right to resign. I think that the Macon report is of such a serious nature in terms of the safeguarding failings that anybody named in that report, including the Archbishop, who has been shown to have failed when it comes to safeguarding, ought to resign, at the very least to start off with, step back from whatever public ministry they occupy, pending an independent investigation.
Right, so, I mean, anyone criticised should resign. That includes multiple bishops, including the Bishop of Lincoln, formerly the Bishop of Ely, then.
I think anybody named in the report who has been shown to have failed when it comes to safeguarding does need, at the very least, in the first instance, to step back from public ministry. And there does really need to be a commitment to transparency, accountability and independence. I mean, Keith Macon's interview there is a damning indictment of the Church's response. And with a heavy heart, the Church says that it's putting victims and survivors at the heart of its response, but actually it's causing further trauma by its ongoing internalisation of process and also obfuscation of accountability and independence. And that is what we must move to with some urgency.
Well, I mean, you know, what does it say that Justin Welby has quit, but multiple others named in the report, including bishops, haven't, including, just to come back to the former Bishop of Ely, now Bishop of Lincoln, he had exactly the same information as Justin Welby, yet he's had a reflection interview instead of quitting. If you'd been criticised in that way, you'd have gone by now, would you?
Yes, I would, and any clergy person in my diocese, of which I have jurisdiction, the Diocese of Newcastle, would in the first instance be asked to step back, and we would conduct an investigation, or rather I wouldn't, but I would ensure that there would be an independent and thorough and appropriate investigation conducted.
So how is it then that these men apparently seem incapable of taking responsibility?
I think, sadly, the Church is beset with a culture that internalises entitlement and a sense of its own narrative. Many of the responses that I've had in the last week have come from partners in civic life, in healthcare, in higher education, in many other institutions and sectors, where they're telling me that my stance is absolutely correct, and that there does need to be transparency and accountability, and the Church sadly seems incapable of doing this, hence why we need to move to independence in our safeguarding.
Yeah, many people have made that call. I mean, you're a brave woman. You called for Justin Welby to resign, and he then did. There are growing calls for the Archbishop of York to resign as well over separate safeguarding concerns. Should he consider his position too, in your view?
I can't speak to the detail of that concern. I would need to see it myself. I have read the Macon review. In a sense, that's what we're speaking about tonight. But I think any senior leader or any clergy person holding a licence in the church or lay minister who has been shown to have failed when it comes to safeguarding needs to consider their position, be held to account by an independent body and step back if necessary. There has to be a change of culture in the church.
Well, just to expand on the point about the Archbishop of York, you sent him, you accused him of sending a pretty strongly worded letter about the suspension of his predecessor. And just to quote what you said that his letter signified a wider and systemic dysfunction of how the hierarchy of the Church of England has dealt with matters of safeguarding. You accused him and the outgoing Archbishop of Canterbury of using coercive language. I mean, it was really strong stuff. Have you had an apology from either of them?
I've not heard directly from either Archbishop. I think when I received the letter, it felt coercive to me. I think particularly addressing me by my first name and then signing the letter with their full titles. The language and the inference in the letter spoke to me strongly of a tone that was coercive and an inappropriate exercise of power. And I've not had an apology from either Archbishop directly for that.
Well, I mean, they deny any wrongdoing. But, I mean, if there's a clear out of the scale that you're talking about, it's a constitutional crisis for the church, isn't it?
You could say that, and I think in some ways this does need to be a watershed moment. You know, the church cannot circle the wagons and turn in on itself. It truly has an opportunity, I think, now to look outwards, to be held to account, and to be a church that truly is safe for all people, building on the excellent work that's happening on the ground already that I can speak of in my diocese and parishes here in the cathedral, that is being undermined by what is going on at the centre.
Bishop Helen Ann Hartley, thank you very much for joining us. Well, from Lambeth Palace, that's all we have time for tonight. Back to you, Krish, in the warm studio.
Now, the rate of inflation has gone up by more than expected thanks to the recent increase in gas and electricity bills. Prices rose by 2.3% in the year to October, making it less likely that the Bank of England will cut interest rates next month. Our economics reporter, Neil MacDonald, is with me. So how worried should we be by 2.3%?
Well, I think that today's figures are a reminder of the inflationary threat that is posed by energy prices. So last month, the price cap for gas and electricity went up by nearly 10%, and that has simply fed straight through to the overall inflation rate. It's moved it from 1.7 to 2.3%, slightly higher than expected. Now, today, the Office for National Statistics set out what's happened to gas and electricity prices over the last 4 years. They've done it as an index, so you can compare the two. You can see, of course, you don't need to be reminded, they actually shot up. Gas almost tripled at one point. They have then come down, but where we are today is that while the rate of energy inflation is lower than it was, the level of those prices remains much higher than they were. You can see electricity up 56% on where it was, gas up still at 88% on where it was in 2021.
And why are they going up?
Well, the European gas market still has a big influence on gas prices in this country. And Russian gas supplies actually still have a big influence on that European market. Not as much as it did do, but it still accounts for about 15% of European gas supplies. Now, in the last week or two, there has been some concern about whether there might be disruption to those supplies, and that has seen European gas prices go to their highest level all year. Now, on Friday, 2 days' time, we find out from Ofgem what's going to happen to the price cap in the UK from the 1st of January. It is likely to go up again, not as much as it did last time in October, but analysts think it's probably not going to start falling until maybe April at the earliest.
Right, and what does that mean for the government?
Well, look, I mean, it's another problem for them to solve after the protesting farmers, after the news of rising pensioner poverty, after very sharp criticism of their budget from a lot of leading retailers. The thing here is, of course, the immediate responsibility lies with the Bank of England. There had been some speculation that they might be about to cut interest rates again in December. After the figures today, financial markets really see that as a bit of a long shot. For the government, of course, higher inflation is more pressure on public services. It buys a lot of stuff, energy included. But I think if the Bank of England does become more cautious about cutting interest rates, that is going to make it much harder to deliver the #1 mission of the government, as they put it, boosting economic growth.
Thanks, Neil. Now, America's Middle East envoy, Amos Hochstein, is on his way to meet Israeli leaders to try and agree a plan for ceasefire talks with Hezbollah after making what he called additional progress in Beirut. But an attempt at the United Nations Security Council to demand a truce in the Gaza war has just been vetoed by the United States because it said it was not contingent on an immediate release of the hostages still being held by Hamas. A warning, this report by our Foreign Affairs correspondent Secunda Kamani contains distressing images.
It's been a devastating assault. Israel's war on Hezbollah has caused mass devastation in Lebanon and killed more than 3,000 people, both fighters and civilians. But international efforts to secure a ceasefire seem to be making progress.
The meeting today built on the meeting yesterday and made additional progress.
US envoy Amos Hochstein has been in Beirut and is travelling to Israel next. The Lebanese government and Hezbollah apparently broadly supportive of his proposal.
We are negotiating now, but not under fire, as they say, because Israel is also under fire. In other words, we have decided that there will be two paths, the path of the battlefield and the path of negotiation.
For now, the airstrikes continue. This, the aftermath of one that killed 3 Lebanese soldiers, even though they're not party to this conflict. Hezbollah continues to fire drones and rockets at Israel too. Here, the Israeli flag flies in the distance over a village in southern Lebanon. Israel says it will only withdraw its troops if Hezbollah pulls back from the border. In Gaza, there's no end in sight to the suffering. Here, desperate families flee the north. More than 100,000 have already been forced out from this apocalyptic wasteland in a matter of weeks. Israel accused of ethnic cleansing, which it denies. For some, the journey out to Gaza City is the last they'll ever make. This woman's husband died along the way. He was sick, she says, and he couldn't endure it. The Israelis bombed us and fired at us. We fled, but there was a huge crowd, and he died on the road. She draws her children close, but how to comfort them amidst so much pain? The corpses pile up outside this hospital, yet more victims who died fleeing their homes. But nowhere is safe in Gaza. As night falls, ambulances bring in the dead and injured following another Israeli strike. Israel insists it only targets Hamas. But everywhere you look here are terrified children, screaming in pain. They bombed a home, this mother says. The children were trapped in the rubble. Amongst the injured, paramedics who allege they were deliberately targeted. Everyone in Gaza must be asking, when and how will this ever end?
Now, to his critics, Donald Trump's choices for his new cabinet are at best inexperienced, at worst dangerously disruptive. To his supporters, they deliberately strike a blow to the establishment elite, which is exactly what they voted for. Kieran Moodley reports.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
The countdown for the latest SpaceX launch may be over, but the one for the start of Donald Trump's explosive second term continues. Standing alongside his new rocket man, Elon Musk, the next US president gazed upwards. The man who said God saved him from an assassin's bullet, now wondering who else should enter his inner orbit when he comes crashing back down to the White House.
This is gonna hurt hurt me a lot worse than it hurts you.
First up, his potential new education secretary, Linda McMahon. The co-founder of World Wrestling Entertainment, her feuds with her two children were make-believe. Yet Trump's choice is genuine, part of his plan to lay the smackdown on the Washington world of federal bureaucrats. McMahon is a Trump loyalist, someone to help him try and eliminate the Department of Education itself, because Republicans believe it's become too woke on gender and race matters. She would have to be confirmed by a Republican-controlled Senate, whose members clearly believe Washington is indeed too woke.
Hi, I'm Steve Daines. My pronouns are Republican majority.
Another pick drawing some laughs, Dr. Mehmet Oz, a famous TV doctor who unsuccessfully ran for Senate in 2022 and who interviewed Trump in 2016.
Why not share your medical records?
And who has now passed his own interview to be the nominee for the head of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Both Oz and McMahon represent the Trump trademark, loyalists with little experience in their new departments, but certain to rile the establishment, like his new choice for NATO ambassador, Matt Whitaker, a lawyer with little foreign policy knowledge. Yet Trump's choices are controversial in other ways. Today on Capitol Hill, the House Ethics Committee is meeting amid calls to release a report into Trump's pick for Attorney General, former Congressman Matt Gaetz, following allegations of sexual misconduct, which Gaetz has always denied. Trump was asked whether he was having second thoughts.
Mr. President, are you reconsidering the nomination of Matt Gaetz?
And there are allegations around others. His Defense Secretary nominee, Pete Hegseth, is accused of sexual assault in 2017. He has said the encounter was consensual, but admitted paying the woman as part of a non-disclosure agreement. And going back to Linda McMahon, she's accused in a lawsuit of being aware of the sexual abuse of teenagers at WWE events. Claims her lawyer says are baseless. Trump's allies say he's always been an unconventional politician. But that so many of his loyalists are facing such claims risks creating an image of his outsiders being potentially outside of the law. Yet Trump is his own man, and perhaps even Elon Musk knows that there are limits to even his sway over the president-elect.
Elon Musk!
Musk had hoped that this man, Howard Lutnick, would be the next Treasury Secretary. No dice. He is now instead the nominee to head the US Commerce Department.
Well, I think we can do at least $2 trillion.
Yeah!
Are divisions emerging already? Or is this all part of the jostling for power that Trump enjoys in his quest to go where no president has gone before?
Well, joining us now from Denver, Colorado is Heidi Ganahl, who was the Republican candidate in Colorado's 2022 election for governor and is a big Trump fan. Heidi Ganahl, what message do you take from these cabinet posts? Because they're obviously, they are not experts in the fields in which they've been appointed, but they are disruptors and they're big Trump fans.
Well, I believe that the Americans voted in a big way to disrupt the status quo in Washington, D.C., and that's exactly what we're getting with these picks. I spoke to Rasmussen polling this morning, and Mark Mitchell, who's the lead pollster there, said that they've been looking at this, and 80% of conservatives across America agree that these cabinet picks are good. It's exactly what they want. They want him to go in and just reconfigure Washington, D.C., and he needs people that are willing to take the heat.
Do you worry at all about Matt Gaetz and the allegations against him and what that report might say? I mean, does it matter what that report says?
At this point, Republicans and conservatives are so used to being accused of everything under the sun that we take it with a grain of salt. Lawfare has been the name of the game for the past few years with the other administration. And so we've gotten to the point where it's the boy who cries wolf. It's like, what is true? I don't know, but I trust our president, our incoming president, Donald Trump, to make the right decision to get the job done.
Right, but this is not a partisan committee. I mean, it's got Republicans on it as well. Do you regard them as equally within the establishment, and you don't believe them?
I think that we've got a problem with trust in D.C. One of the other things the pollster told me this morning was that a big issue in the swing states wasn't even necessarily the specific candidates. It was this distrust of the federal government. And we feel, as Americans, many Americans feel like we've been lied to, and that the government has grown far too big, far too powerful, and we've got to pull that in to rein it in. In America, we love free markets, we love free speech, we love free enterprise, we like to be left alone. That's the way we roll. And that's where I believe voters in just this last election said enough is enough. We want our freedoms back, and we want to be able to run our lives the way we like.
But do you not worry that some of these people just won't be able to do what you expect of them? I mean, what quite often happens in big bureaucracies is that you put somebody in who doesn't know how it works, and the senior people in that bureaucracy run rings around them. And they don't really achieve what they're trying to, achieve. I mean, if you put Dr. Oz in charge of Medicaid and Medicare, I mean, he's not really qualified to run that place. Do you think he'll know enough to actually reform it?
Well, as someone who helped lead a $5 billion university system in Colorado, I was on the Regent Board, which is a statewide elected office. Most of the people in administrative roles or the higher bureaucracy roles, they don't have experience doing that exact job, but they may have good experience being leaders or being disruptors or getting the job done, which is what we want right now. And I think Trump learned a lot in his first term in 2016 about how not to do things. And I think it's interesting to think about what would have happened if Trump had won in 2020. I don't think we would be seeing the disruption that we're seeing now. We wouldn't have had the allies that he does now with Elon Musk and Robert Kennedy Jr. and Vivek and Tulsi. A lot of Democrats are surrounding him that have come around to his way of thinking. I think it's going to be a very interesting time in American history to see how this plays out.
That is certainly true. No one's going to argue with that. Heidi Ganahl, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Well, the government here has ordered a review into the use of physician and anaesthesia associates amidst an increasingly toxic row within the NHS. It all erupted after claims that staff in those roles are being used in place of doctors, and that in some circumstances, patients have died or been harmed. Our health and social care editor, Victoria MacDonald, joins us now from the newsroom. Victoria, why has this become so toxic?
Well, first of all, to explain, physician associates, or PAs, have been used in the NHS for probably about 20 years, although their numbers have increased in recent times. There are about 4,400 on the voluntary register. You're going to find them on hospital wards and in GP practices. Now, they are not doctors, and that lies at the heart of this indeed toxic row. They have 2 years of postgraduate training, and they are there to assist. Now, there have been complaints that patients don't realise they're not seeing a doctor, and that some, whether there's any truth in this needs to be determined, some PAs are claiming it's said that they are medically trained. What is true, as we revealed recently on this programme, is that they are being used to fill gaps in doctors' rotas. And the question around that is, are they being made to work outside their scope, outside their competency?
Right, well, have patients actually been harmed?
Well, there is a court case currently following the death of Emily Chesterton after a pulmonary embolism was misdiagnosed. Now, she believed she was seeing a GP, but it was a PA. And we reported on another, Susan Pollitt. She died after a drain to remove fluid from her abdomen was left in for too long. Now, whether a PA was solely responsible for that is not clear, but the coroner actually commented in that case that the lack of distinct uniform and title physician gives rise to confusion as to whether the practitioner is a doctor, and that's where this review comes in. It will be led by Professor Gillian Lang, who's president of the Royal Society of Medicine, and she will look at what the facts are, because there have been a lot of unsubstantiated claims and a lot of abuse on social media against PAs, and also about the fact the government is planning to expand PA numbers, and the review will look into whether this rollout should continue. The British Medical Association and some royal colleges have said it should be halted.
Victoria MacDonald. Former bandmates have joined friends and family at the funeral of the One Direction star Liam Payne. Payne's coffin was taken to the private service in Amersham on a horse-drawn carriage with floral tributes from his family. His former partner, Gerald Tweedy, was among the mourners, along with fellow stars, including Harry Styles. Payne died last month after falling from a hotel balcony in Buenos Aires. After the break, sale of the century from 12 farms to vast swathes of moorland. The wildlife trusts are buying part of the Rothbury estate, and they plan to restore it for nature. Welcome back. Now, it's the biggest single land sale in England for 30 years. The Duke of Northumberland's family is selling part of the 9,500-acre Rothbury estate to the wildlife trusts for £30 million. On the edge of Northumberland National Park near Rothbury, the sale includes a river, 12 farms, forests and moorland. It gives the wildlife trusts 2 years to find the rest of the money. Our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson, reports.
The Domination School of Architecture, Alnwick Castle, where the Percy family, the Duke of Northumberland, still lives. But they move with the times, hiring out this pile for Harry Potter and countless other productions. And now, selling land, the bedrock of aristocratic power. The glossy video brochure for the Rothbury estate, up for sale by the family after 7 centuries. It is the biggest single land sale in England in 30 years. Sold to an oil sheikh? An oligarch? A rock star? No, the family have something quite different in mind, it seems.
It's all about scale. It's all about scale.
The wildlife trusts, trying to raise 30 million to buy the whole estate for nature and regenerative farming, which is producing food but also managing land for nature.
Putting nature in recovery, tackling the climate crisis, cleaning up our rivers, delivering good quality local food, jobs for local people, investment for a region like this, how they can go hand in hand in an integrated way.
The trusts need £30 million, but they've already got several million and have bought a large slice of the estate already, mostly moorland. But not everyone is happy. A voice imprinted in farming circles here. Livestock auctioneer and farmer Chris Armstrong fears it's the end of farming as he knows it.
I'm fearful that the agenda that the Wildlife Trust has will move away from livestock production in these hills.
And why is that a bad thing? Because farmers can diversify.
Farmers are quite happy to look after the land, but farmers want to farm.
And he's not alone. Others go further, accusing the trusts of wanting to rewild this entire area, whether farmers want it or not.
Going in and completely rewilding it, doing various other things that have been mooted as well, is really concerning a number of local residents.
You're accused in some quarters of just wanting to rewild the whole area. Is that true?
Well, it's nonsense, I have to say. You know, we have said from the outset that we want to work really closely with local farmers on this transition. We absolutely see farmers as part of this. A big part
but
of
transitioning to what? That's what's worrying.
A big part of the vision is all about regenerative farming, and that's for good. You know, because
not rewilding.
Well, you know, the problem is we don't use the word rewilding because it means lots of different things to different people.
It's all about helping to restore the numbers of rare species. Red squirrels here across almost 2,000 acres of woodland. And up over the moors, merlin and curlew are present, but certainly not in the numbers that they could be. Farming opinion here is clearly divided. John Cresswell believes this sale means farmers can do what he does, get paid for environmental land management, like planting this very hedge, produce food and protect nature.
The future for upland farmers is not strong unless we can do 2 jobs, and one is to provide food and the other is to provide and be paid for ecology. So I think this purchase gives farmers at Rothbury a lot of opportunity.
So he relishes the Trust's opportunity at Rothbury Estate. The Trusts do need to raise a lot of money still, but the Duke of Northumberland's family are keen to see them do it. They've set them 2 generous years to buy the rest of the estate. We live in one of the most nature-depleted countries on earth, and our upland hill farming industry is in constant crisis. So what the wildlife trusts are saying is that with a venture like this, they believe they have a vision for addressing both of those critical problems. So if they can achieve this on this scale, it will also contribute to the government's goal of protecting 30% of our land for nature by 2030.
Alex Thompson, tonight's main news. Ukraine has fired British-supplied Storm Shadow missiles at targets inside Russia for the first time, according to reports. Number 10 has declined to comment. That's it for this evening. We are back at 7 tomorrow night. Until then, from all of us, that's Channel 4 News. Have a very good evening.
A change is brewing. Channel 4 weather, sponsored by DeLonghi Bean to Cup coffee machines.
Good evening. Well, it's certainly been another cold and wintry day for all of us, and it's going to stay cold over the next couple of days too. And that means that there is a risk of further snow and ice in places. Met Office yellow weather warnings have been issued for that. And here's the reason for the cold and wintry weather. Arctic air covers a large swathe of the UK. Now, through this evening and overnight, there'll be a few wintry showers for eastern, northern and western coastal counties of the UK, but generally inland it's dry with lengthy clear spells. But by the end of the night, the cloud thickens for southwestern parts of England and Wales, with rain, sleet and hail snow starting to drift in. Now, a cold, frosty and icy night, temperatures widely dropping down to -3 or -4. So tomorrow morning, rush hour time, 8 a.m, a cold, wet and windy start to the day for the Channel Islands and for southwest England and South Wales. There'll be rain, sleet and mostly hail snow. There could be a covering of a couple of centimetres above 200 metres. The Met Office yellow weather warning for that. But elsewhere further northwards, bright skies and just the odd coastal shower towards the west. Now, for the rest of the day, that wintry mix of rain, sleet and hail snow will continue across the far south of England and Wales. Elsewhere, some lengthy spells of sunshine, but again, there'll be wintry showers for northern and western coastal counties and a cold day. Look at these temperatures, around 4 or 5 degrees at best for many. Now, on Friday, another cold, frosty and icy start to the day. There will be spells of sunshine, but some showers around too, particularly for coastal areas, but some making their way a little bit further inland. And again, temperatures struggling well below average for the time of year. Then a big change on the way for the start of the weekend on Saturday. A deep area of low pressure will roll in, so very windy widely, gales or severe gales for some, and not just strong winds. There'll also be heavy rain marching northwards, and where the rain bumps into the colder air across the northern half of the UK, there could be some sleet and snow around for a time. But it will turn much milder for southern parts of the UK with highs of 13 or 14 degrees. Enjoy your evening. Goodbye.
You can expect a drop or two. DeLonghi Bean to Cup coffee machines sponsor weather on 4.